I was born in Bonham, Fannin County, Texas, on the 26th of May, 1853. My father, J.G. Hardin, was a Methodist preacher and circuit rider. My mother, Elizabeth Hardin, was a blonde, highly cultured, and charity predominated in her disposition. She made my father a model wife and helpmate. My father continued to travel his circuit as a preacher until 1869, when he moved and located near Moscow in Polk County on account of bad health. In the same year, he moved again, this time to Sumter in Trinity County, where he taught school. He organized and established an academy, to which institution he sent my elder brother, Joe G. Hardin, and myself. In the meantime, my father was studying law, and in 1861 was admitted to the bar. The war between the states had broken out at this time, and while my father had voted against secession, yet when his state seceded, he went with his state and immediately organized a company to fight and, if need be, to die for Southern rights. He was elected captain of this company, but resigned at the solicitation of the best citizens, Captain Ballinger being elected to the command. So my father stayed at home because, as said the foremost men of the community, you can be of more good use at home than off fighting Yankees. Although I was but 9 years old at this time, I had already conceived the idea of running off and going with a cousin to fight Yankees. But my father got on to the little game and put an end to it all by giving me a sound thrashing. Still, the principles of the Southern cause loomed up in my mind even bigger, brighter, and stronger as the months and years rolled on. I had seen Abraham Lincoln burned and shot to pieces in effigy so often that I looked upon him as a very demon incarnate who was waging a relentless and cruel war in the South to rob her of her most sacred rights. So you can see that the justice of the Southern cause was taught to me in my youth. And if I never relinquished those teachings in after years, surely I was but true to my early training. The way you bend a twig, that is the way it will grow, is an old saying, and a true one. So I grew up a rebel. In 1862, my father moved to Livingston in Polk County, where he taught school and practiced law. In 1865, we again moved back to Sumter, my father still teaching and practicing law, my brother and I being regular scholars. Our parents had taught us from our infancy to be honest, truthful, and brave, and we were taught that no brave boy would let another call him a liar with impunity. Consequently, we had lots of battles with other boys at school. I was naturally active and strong, and always came out best, though sometimes with a bleeding nose, scratched face, or a black eye. But true to my early training, I would try again. We continued in Sumter at school for some time, and of course I received the biggest part of my education there. I always tried to excel in my studies and generally stood at the head. Being playful by nature, I was generally first on the playground at recess and noon. Marbles, roly-hole, cat, bullpen, and town ball were our principal games, and I was considered by my schoolmates an expert. I knew how to knock the middleman, throw a hot ball, and ply the bat. Of course, we had examinations and school exhibitions, which were creditable to all concerned. But in 1867, an incident occurred which I think proper to relate. We were preparing for an examination when one of my schoolmates and myself had an almost fatal fight. His name was Charles Sloter, and as he wanted to be the boss among the boys, of course I stood in his way. In order to down me, he publicly accused me of writing some doggerel on the wall about one Sal, a girl scholar. It commenced, "I love Sal and Sal loves mutton," and ended in some reflections upon Sal's personal attractions. I knew that he was the author of this poetry, and when he accused me of writing it, I at once denied it and proved it up on him. He came over to my seat in the schoolroom, struck me, and drew his knife. I stabbed him twice, almost fatally in the breast and back.
Ew.
A howl at once went up to expel me from the school, some even wanting to hang me. The trustees, however, heard the true facts in the case, and instead of expelling me, completely exonerated me, and the courts acquitted me. I may mention here that poor Charlie was long afterward hung by a mob in an adjoining county. Now, as I'm about to leave the story of my boyish days and enter upon the description of a course of life which, when once entered on, few live to reach their majority, I deem it proper to say a few words more about the way my early years were spent before going on further with the history of my life. I was always a very child of nature, and her ways and moods were my study. My greatest pleasure was to be out in the open fields, the forest, and the swamps. My greatest pleasure was to get out among the big pines and oaks with my gun and the dogs and kill deer, coons, possums, or wildcats. If any of those Sumter boys with whom I used to hunt ever see this history of my life, I asked them to say whether or not our sport in those old days was not splendid. John Norton, Bill Gordon, Shiles, and Hiram Frazier, and Saul Adams, all of Sumter, can all bear witness to the good times we had then. We were still living in Polk County when my father took up the idea that he would improve his headright, situated about 3 miles northwest of Livingston, bordering on Long King Creek. Captain T.L. Epperson of Livingston conceived the same idea about his headright at the same time as my father, and I believe he made a success of his venture in farming. Not so my father. He soon became disgusted with country life and actually gave his headright farm and improvements on it to his brother, Barnett Hardin, and wife whose name was Ann. I do not know the reason of this generosity, but believe it was in order that neither he, his wife, nor his children should ever be bothered with the plague of ticks that infested the place. Of all the places I've ever been, I believe that to have been the most accursedly ticky. I believe now my father to have been a most wise man in giving that place away. When we were improving it, we had 6 or 8 colored men cleared up, rail splitting, building houses, etc. It is needless to say that my brother Joe and myself spent most of our time out there with the Negroes, dogs, and of course the ticks. What a big time we had hunting and fishing with them. The ticks as well as the Negroes and dogs, for the ticks went wherever we did. I remember a hunt I got into by my lone self, which is worth narrating before I leave my early days. We had a horse named Jack, which is straight away, and we finally heard of him at old Mr. Sykes about 3.5 miles west of our place. I was told to go and get Jack, so next morning, after locating his whereabouts, I called my dogs, got my bridle and a rope, and started out afoot after Jack. I got to old Bob Sykes' place, found Jack there, and of course the old man would have me stay to dinner. I ate heartily as the meal was gotten up in good country style. It was late when I started back to the Hardin camp with Jack and my dogs. It was drizzling rain and the skies looked black. We had about 3.5 miles of dense wood to go through, and report had it that wild animals abounded there. However, I had great confidence in Jack and my dogs, and nothing but a ghost could scare me unless it was lightning. I started the dogs out, and presently I heard old Watch bark, and later on I heard the others all baying as if they had sure enough found something. I took the course, and after going a mile, found Watch at the foot of a big white oak tree, looking up and gnawing at the base, while the other dogs were about 20 yards off looking up into the branches of the big oak. I looked up and finally made out 4 big coons up at the very top of the tree. Now, I wanted those coons to take to camp as a trophy of my trip. I knew that Joe would laud me to the skies if I succeeded in getting them, and it meant a big stew for all hands that night. There were no limbs for me to reach, so I decided to ride Jack up close to the trunk, stand up on his back, and throw the rope over the lowest limb. I did this, trusting to Jack to stand still and not run off. The next 2 limbs were way above me, but with the use of the rope, I got to the limb where the coons were. The coons, however, concluding the situation was getting decidedly hot, decided to charge me. They began to form in line, one behind the other, to growl and show fight. Meanwhile, I had tied myself securely to the tree and had broken off a bough to defend myself with. Here came the coons and attacked me at once. I struck right and left with my weapon, but it broke in pieces the first lick, so I had nothing left but my fist. I fought long and hard, and one by one I knocked those coons out of that treetop 50 feet high, and they no sooner hit the ground than the dogs made short work of them. I then untied myself from the tree, and with the use of the rope reached the ground a wiser, if not a braver boy. I was covered with blood from head to foot. My hands, face, and breast were torn and lacerated, being badly bitten and scratched. I had to leave my rope up on the first limb, so when I dropped to the ground, I piled the coons up and tied them together with my galluses. I then sat down and made a rope out of my breeches to lead the faithful Jack. I was in a fix now. 3 miles from home, raining, a loose horse, 4 coons, and 3 dogs, going through a swamp in my shirt tail and night coming on. To make matters worse, Jack rebelled against packing those coons. Of all the pitching, jumping, and kicking you ever saw, Jack did it then. After considerable begging and coaxing, I finally induced Jack to let me and the coons ride. We all struck out for camp and got there after dark. On our arrival, we had a regular jollification. They told me that they wondered why I was not lying a dead boy in that swamp after such an experience. I told them that it was pluck that both saved me and captured the coons. Here I wish to tell my readers that if there's any power to save a man, woman, or child from harm outside the power of the living God, it is this thing called pluck. I never was afraid of anything except ghosts, and I have lived that down now, and they have no terrors for me. Constant association with Negroes in my young days had made me superstitious in this respect, and I was well versed in old folklore about ghosts, spirits, dead men's shadows, graveyards, etc. And many a time then did I honestly believe I had seen them. Soldier, what the hell kind of hat is that? It's an AI hat, sir. I'll get rid of it. Yes, sir. And then the Lord said, "Look out, fellas." Respect, and I was well versed in old folklore about ghosts, spirits.